Welcome dear students. Today we are going to discuss about Mahayana Buddhism. I have divided this topic in two parts. In part 1, we will be focusing on Buddhism and will discuss about the causes or the different theories as they have been put forward by the scholars regarding the origin or emergence of Mahayana Buddhism. In the second lecture, we shall be focusing on Mahayanism as a philosophy. But before we discuss about today's lecture, let me briefly introduce you to the main objectives. That is, to know about Buddhism as a doctrine, to know about the causes responsible for the sectarianism within Buddhism, to know about the origin of Mahayana Buddhism, to know about the main features of Mahayana Buddhism, and finally, to know about the philosophical doctrines of Mahayana Buddhism. The best way to explain the key ideas behind the Buddhist belief is to say that it is a non-theistic philosophy whose focal point is an individual struggle in life and proposes that instead of looking for answers outside or above, we should look within to find reality and clarification. At the Parliament of the World's Religions in the Chicago in 1993, this philosophy was explained as a religion of wisdom that is driven by sympathy and the search for explanation. In Buddhism, unlike other faiths like Brahmanism, nirvana is accessible to all who desire it. Defilement and false ideas can be cleared by living a life of self-reflection and deliberation. It has been argued that the founder of this tradition is not a god or any other kind of gods, but a man who achieved Buddhahood or enlightenment through his efforts. There are three main sources for the people to obtain these ideas. They are Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. They are often referred as three jewels or the pillars. However, one has to understand that as there are different sects, such concepts can be looked at and understood in different ways, but all hold the same belief as their core beliefs are still same. The Buddha is a name for the way to salvation and enlightenment that was shown in the life of Buddha. The main philosophy of this religion can be seen in the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path. At the last, there is the Buddhist community or the Sangha, and it is they who keep the Dharma alive and teach it, thus can be seen as a place of refuge. According to the tradition, Queen Maya of Sakya gave birth to Siddhartha. We are being told that she had a dream in which a white elephant with 6 tusks and a lotus in its trunk entered her womb. This dream has been interpreted as an indication of the future Buddha. There is not much information available on the early history of Buddha. This has naturally resulted into various myths and misconceptions about Buddha and Buddhism. Buddha laid the foundation of Sangha for the propagation of this philosophy. The first stage in the development of Buddhism per se then is said to be that of the Hinayana, or what may be termed as the Theravada school of Buddhism. Before we discuss about the emergence of Mahayana Buddhism, it is important to have an idea about the growth and development of Buddhist tradition. According to Buddhist tradition, Buddha at the age of 29 left the palace to see the real face of the world. As the story goes, we have been told that he saw 4 things which proved to be a turning point in his life. The first thing he saw was an old man. Second was a man with a severe illness. Third, he saw a dead body. And the last thing he saw was a homeless monk who was in search of spiritual happiness and had left behind the material things. The first 3 things shocked Siddhartha as he was yet to figure out the real purpose of life. He soon realized that suffering and death are real and seem impossible to avoid. It was the old monk who gave him hope that a true path may help one to avoid these harsh realities. This was the time when Siddhartha gave up his princely title and other worldly attachments and took the path of a wandering ascetic. This path was not a new one, as there was a well-established tradition of ascetics in India who too were searching for the cause of suffering and the ways to get rid of them. During his initial travels, he met many scholars from different faiths who introduced him to different paths of wisdom through different methods like yoga, etc. Siddhartha was a sharp student and as such got mastery over many of such techniques quickly. But he was not satisfied as they appear temporarily in nature and thus to him cannot be the permanent solution to the problems as one has to face in the world. Later, he decided to follow an extreme path which included long fasting and living with simple conditions. This no doubt exposed Buddha to nature's harsh realities, but yet not to the basic question, that is, the purpose of being in this world. Soon, Buddha realized that this is not the true path he was looking for. It was here that Buddha decided in favor of a middle path, and in due course of time, one fine night, we have been told that under the tree at a place called Bodh Gaya reached the state of Buddhahood on the night of a full moon. He gave his first sermon in the deer park at Sarnath. This event in the Buddhist tradition has been referred as setting the wheel of the Dharma in motion. His first followers were the 5 fellows. Buddha laid the foundation of Buddhist Sangha and made it a mission to propagate his 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path, no matter what caste or background a person belongs to. He spent the rest of his life traveling and preaching his philosophy in different areas. He and the other monks in the Sangha lived a very simple life. Before his death, we are being told that he told his followers to take refuge in his examples, Buddha, his teachings, Dharma, and the Buddhist community, that is the Sangha. Now, we'll be briefly discussing about the Buddhist philosophy. It is believed in Buddhist philosophy that this is meant to free a person from the desire to want and lead them to be good in both thought and action. The Eightfold Path of Buddha consists of right view, right resolve, right speech, right behavior, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and last one is right meditation. Thus, one may argue that the 4 noble truths and the Eightfold Path truly summarize the core philosophy of Buddhist tradition. Now, after having a brief idea about Buddhism and its philosophy, now let me focus on origin of Mahayana Buddhism. Throughout its history in India, Buddhism interacted with other religions, thereby influenced many of them and at the same time got influenced by them in many ways. Such changes, however, have always made it hard to know how much one religion can take from another without becoming a part of it. Even if a religion is able to keep its own identity, there is still the question of how much it changes as it tries to define and defend itself against its opponents. These issues became particularly sensitive for Buddhism in India during the later half of the first millennium AD. As Hinduism grew stronger at all levels of culture, thus posing new challenges to it. This was also the time when Buddhism spread to new regions. It was in this process of challenges and accommodation that we came across in developments taking place within the Buddhist tradition, which later paved the way for it to split into various sects. So far, the origin of Mahayana Buddhism is concerned, various opinions had been put forward by the scholars. We come across three possible theories regarding the origin of this philosophy. The origin of this philosophy has been examined in terms of a sectarian origin, lay origin, and the forest dwelling monks origin. So now let me take these one by one. First, we will be talking about sectarian origin. In the past, scholars influenced by Christian ideas of split and sectarian development inferred that the rise of Mahayana took place as a result of some type of sectarian division within Buddhism. There are some issues in this viewpoint, as it has been pointed out by Backhart and Gombrich that in early Buddhism, sects were simply based on their understanding of certain points in the Vinaya and in particular of the Pratimoksha, and as such they did not involve doctrinal issues. From this, one may thus argue that in the beginning Mahayana was not a sect, rather it was a religious phenomena which influenced monks regardless of their sect. This observation is based on the fact that Mahayana and Hinayana monks used to live in the same monasteries as observed by the 7th century Chinese pilgrim Hunsang. However, the scholarship in West, scholars on account of their thinking of a sect as a body of opinion, heterodoxy, due to their monotheistic cultural background, developed such a view. This has resulted into some misunderstandings while interpreting Buddhist sect history. Gathan is of the opinion that as Mahayana literature appeared in ancient India, monks and nuns from various existing schools were more or less favorable, inclined towards the new sutras. Thus, there is an initial acceptance of emerging Mahayana literature by all. The members of Sangha who were introduced to these new sutras followed them on their interest. However, they remained within their existing schools. It has been observed that the monks and nuns continued to live together with those who did not share their caste regarding the new teachings. This was partly because the questions on the authority and status of new literature were not decided along the sectarian lines. Moreover, Gathan notes that it was later when Buddhism developed in China and Tibet, an exclusive Mahayana outlook came to be adopted. It was in these two areas that we see Buddhism's Mahayanist form flourished and got further matured. Therefore, the view of Mahayana Buddhism as a separate tradition of Buddhism with its subdivisions and philosophical schools to some degree may be only related to the historical outcome of its growth and development in China and Tibet. By contrast, such development never occurred in India. Thus, one may safely argue against sectarian origin of the Mahayana Buddhism in India. In short, since Indian Mahayana Buddhism did not arise as a result of Vinaya differences, it is unlikely to have been the result of division and is therefore not a sect of Buddhism. Rather, in the words of Williams, it was an incidence that exceeds the boundaries of different Vinaya traditions, as well cutting across the boundaries of doctrinal schools. So now we will be talking about the second opinion, that is lay origin. There is a second view which saw Indian Mahayana movement as a lay reaction to the monastic privileges and indifferences. In the view of Backhart and Gombrich, this can be based on the idea that the laity, in reflecting on supposed excessive privileges of monks who tried to gain fairer religious rights for themselves. Thus, it was in this context we see that not long before the Christian era began, a new form of Buddhism, that is the Mahayana. However, This view of lay origin too have raised several questions. In the words of Williams, most scholars have nowadays become extremely skeptical of the thesis of the lay origin of the Mahayana. As a case in point, Williams illustrates on the work of Sophon, who has not found support for the widespread connection of the laity with the origin or growth of Mahayana. For Williams and others, this is important, for it contradicts a view generally held until quite recently that the Mahayana represents primarily a move by the laity and those concerned to their aspirations against elitist monks. Additionally, in the context of ancient India, Williams concludes that religious innovation during ancient times was made mostly by the religiously and institutionally significant groups of people who had the time and authority to do so. In this way, one thus may argue that Mahayana was not the outcome of a lay aspiration or a lay movement, rather it was inspired by the rich mercantile classes. Furthermore, while it is conceivable that Mahayana could have originated without writing, it implies, however, that in time of a stable and respected Buddhist organization would need to preserve writing that would inevitably occur. Williams argues that it is difficult to see in the case of Buddhism what that organization could be if not members of the regular organization which preserve Buddhist texts, that is, the Sangha. It is reasonable to believe that the Sangha would not have preserved the radical, innovative texts that were developed by a lay movement which possibly may not be endorsed by the Sangha itself. William draws this idea from the work of Harrison, who has discovered the translations into Chinese of Mahayana Sutra by Lokshima in the 2nd century CE. This may be regarded as one of the earliest surviving Mahayana texts. Harrison showed that the development of early Mahayana texts was in relation to these sources is significantly that of monks as well as nuns and not the laity. Thus, at the end, we may argue that the lay origin for Indian Mahayana lacks evidences showing laity involvement in Mahayana at the start. Now, we will be focusing on the third viewpoint, which believes that Mahayanaism originated because of forest-dwelling monks. There is yet another viewpoint regarding the emergence of Indian Mahayana which focuses on the role of forest-dwelling monks. This view is based on the research of Harrison and Williams, who suggested that some clue regarding early development of the Mahayana came from forest-dwelling monks. As there are evidences from many Mahayana sutras of an uncompromising and committed ascetic attempt to return to the original inspiration of Buddhism. This is far from the view that sutras being produced are products of a lay, urban, devotional movement. In fact, Williams argues that Mahayana may partly represent a citric, almost aesthetic, revivalistic trend. For example, we have an early Mahayana sutra, Matriya Yamaha Samhanda Sutra, the lion's roar of Matriya in this context. Based on the work of Sophon, William argues that this sutra promotes a conservative monastic vision of Buddhism. It talks about the inferiority of the laity and advocates more in favor of austere practices in the forests as the ideal one. It also condemns less austere monks for their involvement in inferior practices. In short, this third view may be summarized using Gathon's insights when he argued that more recent scholarship in favor of the new sutras suggested that the origin of the Indian Mahayana may be seen in the activity of forest-dwelling ascetic monks attempting to return to the ideas of original Buddhism. Hope you must have got an idea about the origin of the Mahayana Buddhism, as it has been put by the different scholars in their own viewpoint. Now we will be focusing on the main features of Mahayana Buddhism. First, we see language of the literature. The Hinayana school of Buddhism subscribed to Pali for the composition of their non-canonical literature. As you already know that Buddha used the language of the masses, so it was the Pali which was the language of early Buddhism. But a major shift in this regard was being taken by the Mahayana thinkers. The later school subscribed to the Sanskrit language for the writing of their literature. The scholars argue in this regard that the main reason for this shift was owing to the religious intelligentsia like Nagarjuna and others who were converted Buddhists from Brahmanical faith. In this way, we see that Buddhism accommodated many things from other traditions, and language being the one. The second was salvation as impersonal phenomena. The Hinayana school believed that the salvation is personal phenomena and one can be attained by one's personal efforts only, and that person cannot guide others for the same. But this understanding of salvation was not agreed by the Mahayana thinkers, who opined that if the person after attaining salvation would not have been able to help the people for the same path, then what was the need of the hour for Gautam Buddha after getting enlightened for himself to visit various places for decades to make people aware about it, or to propagate his philosophy to others? Thus, one has to seek salvation not only for himself but for the entire community. Third, the deification of Buddha. The Hinayana people do not worship Buddha as a god, rather they treated him as a role model for seeking nirvana. But the Mahayana people defied Buddha and started his worship in idol format. Scholars like Salar Gosala argued that this new development was introduced by the converted Buddhists as a legacy of their previous religion, that is Brahmanism, like Nagarjuna, Ashwagosha and others. Fourth, enlightenment to lay people. The Mahayana school of Buddhism challenged the notion of Hinayana that salvation can be attained only by monks and nuns of the Sangha. This school believed that it can be attained by laymen also while living a life of a householder. For this purpose, they advocated different philosophies like Shunyavad, Vijnayavad, etc., and dubbed them as Madhyamika or medium way philosophies. Another thing was new philosophical orientation. Mahayana school of Buddhism propounded two major philosophical approaches, best known as Shunyavad and Vijnayavad. The former approach is propounded by a philosopher called Nagarjuna, who lived during the reign of Kushanas. This philosophical school propagated the concept of a void or emptiness as ultimate principle, or what they called it tattva. While as the later approach was propounded by the people like Dharmakriti, and this philosophy straight away rejected the existence of Atma as something as the source of creation. Both the philosophies are collectively categorized as Madhyamika Darshana, or philosophies of the middle path. So, you must have now got an idea about Buddhism, about Mahayanaism, because we have discussed briefly about the different causes or the factors responsible for the emergence of this philosophy, and lastly we also try to discuss some main features of this philosophy. So far the philosophy of Mahayanaism is concerned, that will be taken up in the next lecture, and we will also try to address the issues like how Mahayanaism helped Buddhism to spread into the new areas and how the different traditions or different religions were accommodated within Buddhism. Dear students, that was all about today's lecture regarding Mahayana Buddhism. Hope you have understood it well. We shall meet again with a new topic. Till then, take care of your good self. Bye.